If you have walked away from any kind of rigid belief system, you may struggle a bit with setting boundaries. Hey, I'm Gina, and this is the Religious Trauma Recovery Podcast. I'm an LMFT with a specialty in religious trauma. If you're an ex-evangelical like myself, you may have noticed that high control groups encourage codependency, especially among women. It feels like if we don't give up every dirty detail of our private lives, we're kind of betraying the community, or somehow we're sinning or suspect. It's uncomfortable to share so much, but we keep sharing because we don't want others to question our faith or our dedication to God or the church. Our lack of knowledge and comfort around this topic is pretty intentional from an abuser's perspective. They really want to keep us docile and unable to keep or set boundaries so that we can be taken advantage of even further. Now, a lot of people likely aren't educated around this topic because psychology and therapy have been pretty taboo until recently. There's nothing an abuser hates more than to have limits to their power. So let's get into it. Today, I'm talking about boundaries and the anatomy of a boundary, the different traits of boundaries, the styles of boundaries, and the different types of boundaries that are out there. I'm also going to give you some tools and ideas of how to lay them down with family members that don't totally accept your journey of deconstruction or deprogramming. Personal boundaries are so important because they're the standards and expectations of how we are to be treated in relationships. When we have healthy boundaries, they protect us and they keep us safe. I've heard it stated that boundaries are kind of like a roadmap to teach other people in how to love us, which I think is really beautiful. Unhealthy boundaries really cut us off from support and they isolate us from the outside world. They can also make us incredibly vulnerable and feel like we have no control in our lives. Unhealthy boundaries are really what keeps us unbalanced and susceptible to abuse. So there are 6 different types of boundaries. We'll go through them one by one to ensure that you know what they look like. And when dealing with abusers, especially around coercive control, knowledge is power. So what is a personal boundary? There are limits and rules that we set for ourselves in relationships. A person with healthy boundaries can say no to others when they want to, but they're also comfortable opening themselves up to intimacy and close relationships. Now, a person who keeps others at a distance, whether emotionally, physically, or otherwise, is said to have really rigid boundaries. Alternatively, someone who tends to get too involved with other people tends to have porous boundaries. So let's get into these definitions. These are common traits of rigid, porous, and healthy boundaries. So let's start with rigid boundaries. Rigid boundaries, I want you to think of the Great Wall of China. These people tend to avoid intimacy and close relationships. They're pretty unlikely to ask for help. They have very few close relationships. They're pretty protective of personal information, almost to a paranoid degree. They may seem detached or aloof to romantic partners, and they keep others at a distance just to avoid even the possibility of rejection. So those are rigid boundaries. Now let's think about porous boundaries. So next we have porous boundaries. These people tend to overshare personal information. Some of them have difficulty saying no to the requests of other people. Some of them are pretty over-involved in other people's problems or lives. People with porous boundaries really can be dependent on the opinions of other people. It can be hard to make a decision without the opinion of other people. They're really accepting of abuse or disrespect, and they really fear rejection if they do not comply with other people. So those are 2 big things on the spectrum, right? These rigid boundaries and these porous boundaries. So what is a healthy boundary? It's kind of somewhere in the middle. Healthy boundaries tend to value their own opinions. These people don't compromise their values for other people. They share personal information, but it's in an appropriate way. It's not over or undersharing. People with healthy boundaries tend to know their own personal wants and needs and can communicate those to other people. They're also accepting when other people say no. Now, most people have a mix, right, of different boundary types. Nobody is perfect. Nobody has just great healthy boundaries all the way around. It's kind of a mix. So, for example, someone could have really healthy boundaries at work, really porous boundaries in romantic relationships, and then kind of a mix of all types with their family. Now, the appropriateness of boundaries kind of depends heavily on the setting. So what's appropriate for you to say while you're out with your friends is not necessarily what you should be sharing at work. Otherwise, you end up in HR. Now, some cultures have very different concepts and expectations of boundaries. For example, in some cultures, it's considered wildly inappropriate to express emotions publicly. In other cultures, emotional expression is encouraged. It's kind of a dichotomy. So this leads us to personal boundaries. What are those? What are the different types? There's actually 6 different ones, like I mentioned before. So let's start with physical. Physical boundaries refer to personal space and physical touch. Healthy physical boundaries include an awareness of what's appropriate and what's not in various settings and different types of relationships, like hugging, shaking hands, or a kiss, right? Physical boundaries can be violated if someone touches you when you don't want them to, or when they invade your personal space, like rummaging through your bedroom. If we look at this from a religious trauma lens, the church violates this boundary through laying on of hands and or touching people when they don't want to be touched. This can be really triggering for people, especially for those who have experienced sexual assault. So we want to be mindful of that. Next, we have intellectual boundaries. These refer to thoughts and ideas. Healthy intellectual boundaries include respect for others' ideas and an awareness of appropriate discussion. Should we talk about the weather or should we talk about politics? Yeah. So intellectual boundaries can be violated when someone dismisses or belittles another person's thoughts or ideas or steals them. This happens to a lot of women in business settings. They'll say something and have an idea, and then the dude next to them will claim that idea is theirs. Now, the church doesn't really respect intellectual ideas unless they align with their own beliefs. They view intellectual freedom as a threat while claiming that you're free. The church doesn't really respect intellectual boundaries unless they align with their own beliefs. So they view intellectual freedom as a threat while claiming that you're free. They become dismissive, manipulative, utilize threats, and can even implement disciplinary action in order to provide and protect the belief system that they have using power, control, and intimidation. Next, we have emotional boundaries. Now, these refer to a person's feelings. Healthy emotional boundaries include limitations on when to share and when not to share personal information. For example, gradually sharing personal information using the development of a relationship, as opposed to revealing everything to everyone all at once. Emotional boundaries are violated when someone criticizes, belittles, or invalidates another person's feelings. This is a really big one in the church. This is where codependency crops up. In those prayer circles and in small groups and youth groups and all the things, the pressure to share every dirty detail of life is almost overwhelming. It's like if we don't share, we're suspect, right? And if we do share, we give them ammo to manipulate us and use the information against us later. The less we share, the better in order to protect ourselves, is the feeling. So in action, when we're in the face of an abuser, drawing a boundary can look like, I don't have anything to share right now, or I'm really not comfortable sharing in this setting, or not saying anything at all. If you need more specifics for your specific situation, talking with a therapist can really help. Next, we have sexual boundaries. Sexual boundaries refer to sexual, intellectual, and physical aspects of sexuality. Healthy sexual boundaries involve mutual understanding and respect of limitations and desires between sexual partners. Sexual boundaries can be violated when unwanted sexual touch, pressure to engage in sexual acts, leering, which is staring at people when they're obviously uncomfortable, or sexual comments. Hello, purity culture, right? Purity culture is the policing of people's sexual lives, identities, and practices. And this also perpetuates rape culture. Women are shamed for their own bodies and held responsible for men's thoughts. Men are taught to view women as objects due to their portrayal of women being the highest temptation. So the more and better that they can resist, the more spiritual they appear. Now, in order to see a person as an object, we must also see them as less somehow. So contrary to what some of these rigid belief systems teach, it's okay to be aroused. It is okay to talk about sex and know what you like. And it's okay to masturbate. I'll talk more about this in an upcoming episode about purity culture specifically. Next, we have material boundaries, and these refer to money and possessions. Healthy material boundaries involve setting limits on what you will share and with who. Now, for example, it can be appropriate to lend a car to a family member, but not to somebody you just met that morning. Material boundaries are violated when somebody steals or damages another person's possessions, or when they pressure them to give or lend them their possessions. And this is an interesting one. Now, within the church, we're supposed to lend things to other people while having an agenda of evangelism. And I think an aspect of material boundaries encompasses the financial piece. Financial boundaries refer to the money you earn at your job and how you handle that within your life. Poverty is glorified in a lot of denominations, and it is thought to make parishioners more spiritual, while the leadership may or may not be held to the same kind of expectation. In some denominations, materialism is accepted as long as a tithe is given. So 1/10 of your income is supposed to go to the church to line the pockets of leadership. I've heard of families and friends say that it was difficult to put food on the table sometimes, but they're so proud that they paid their tithe because it makes them more spiritual. Material boundaries also encompass achievement. Within the church, when a person achieves something, they are not to take credit for those ideas, time, dedication, and creativity that it took to attain any and all accomplishments, because God did it, right? If a person does take credit for any of the good things they have in life, they are looked down on, ignored, and or shamed for taking credit from God. Lastly, we have boundaries around time. This refers to how a person uses their time. To have healthy time boundaries, a person must set aside enough time for each facet of life, like work, relationships, and hobbies. Time boundaries are violated when another person demands too much of another's time. Does that ring a bell for anybody? The more you go to church, the more they will ask, but the more spiritual you look, right? So it's about keeping up appearances, but the church violates this boundary by asking or passively aggressively demanding that we spend all of our free time at church, because there's no other thing that's more important than spirituality, right? And going to heaven. So now, examples. Let's say your family doesn't know about your deconversion yet, and you're supposed to spend the holidays with them. First of all, you don't have to go to that holiday party if you don't want to. You don't have to do anything you don't want to do, period. Okay? If you do choose to go, and that one auntie is going to be there who just likes to pry into everyone's life like it's her job, and you don't have to indulge her. It's absolutely okay to tell her things like, I really appreciate your concern over my life. I know you care about me deeply. I love you too. I don't really feel like talking about myself today. I would rather hear about you. What's going on with you? This kind of alleviates the pressure of you having to spill your guts while making auntie feel important and loved. Yeah? If you remember the escalation map for confronting someone in sin in Matthew 18:15-20, we start talking to someone in private, then we involve others, then we tell the church, then we treat them like non-believers. It's the exact same kind of principle for boundaries, except more healthy and less shame. So we tell this person that's violated our boundaries what they did wrong in a loving way. I really appreciate our friendship, and I really appreciate you as my friend. I just want you to know that you crossed my boundaries when you did XYZ, and it made me feel unsafe, and I didn't appreciate it. Most people will respond to this in a, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry kind of way. But if they keep doing whatever it is, regardless of their reasons, and you feel uncomfortable or unsafe, we need to have another conversation about this, right? You can say, we've talked about this before, and I just want to remind you that I don't appreciate how you treated me, you spoke to me, or you treated my kids, my family, etc. I now don't feel safe being around you because you keep breaking my boundaries, and it breaks my trust. So I'm going to distance myself from you until we can rebuild trust and I can feel safe again in this relationship. It's to the point. It's really clear. Clear is kind, right? So being clear and direct in your conversation with this is going to be really helpful. That way there's no questions later. If it does happen again or continues and you're reaching your limit, it is okay to take some time to sort out your thoughts and formulate a conversation map. There's a great outline on how to do this with a Dear Man, DEAR man letter. This comes from Dialectical Behavioral Therapy, DBT, and each letter represents an aspect of navigating hard conversations. The first letter, D, stands for describe, and you describe the current situation if necessary, and you stick to the facts. You tell the person exactly what you're reacting to and why. E is for express. You express your feelings and opinions about the situation. Don't assume that the other person knows how you feel. Then we move on to assert. A, assert. Assert yourself by asking for what you want or saying no very clearly. Don't assume that other people will figure out what you want. Just remember that others can't read your mind. Then we come to R, reinforce. We reinforce this person ahead of time, or we reward this person ahead of time, so to speak, by explaining positive effects of getting what you want or what you need. And if necessary, you can also clarify the negative consequences of not getting what you want or need. Then we come to the letter M. So we've got dear, and then we start with man. So M is mindful. Be mindful and keep your focus on your goals. What is your goal for the conversation? Maintain your position. Don't be distracted. Don't get off the topic. Speak like a broken record, so to speak, by keep asking for what you want, or say no and express your opinion over and over again. Just keep replaying the same thing over and over again. Ignore those attacks. If the other person attacks, threatens, or tries to change the subject, ignore the threats, comments, or attempts to divert you. Do not respond to those. Just ignore them and keep making your point. A is the next one. Appear confident. Be effective and competent. Use a confident voice, a tone, and physical manner with good eye contact. There's no stammering, no whispering, no staring at the door, no retreating. Have courage. Then comes the letter N. Negotiate. Be willing to give, to get. Offer and ask for other solutions to the problem. Reduce your request if you have to, or if you want to. Say no, but offer something else, or to solve the problem another way. Focus on what's going to work. Collaboration is key here. This can feel really uncomfortable at first. That is okay. That's normal. The ability to draw a boundary may be new for you. Some of you may be doing this for the first time. It is okay to stand up for yourself. It is okay to tell people no, especially if what they're doing is unwelcome. We don't have to indulge people who break our boundaries due to their perceived spiritual prowess or seemingly good intentions. It's up to us to protect ourselves. People are guests in our life. We don't have to put up with not feeling safe and not feeling cared for. That's all I have for today, y'all. If you like what you heard, please hit like and subscribe. If you would like to connect, you can find me on TikTok, Blue Sky, and Instagram with the handle Trauma Recovery 101. You can also find me at my website, traumarecovery101.com. Have a good day, y'all. Cheers.